It turns out that we evaluate ourselves differently than other people evaluate us. We tend to think about our competency. We tend to evaluate ourselves in terms of our competency. How well are we going to be able to do this? How am I going to be able to find something I have in common with this person to make this conversation go well? How am I going to put my gratitude into words? How am I going to actually support somebody who's in need? What am I going to do? Other people, though, tend to evaluate us not in terms of our competency, but in terms of our warmth.
That was Nick Epley on Psychologists Off the Clock.
We are 5 experts in psychology here to bring you cutting-edge and science-based ideas to help you flourish in your relationships, work, and health.
I'm Dr. Debbie Sorensen, a clinical psychologist practicing in Mile High, Denver, Colorado, author of Act for Burnout and Act Daily Journal.
From America's Heartland, I'm Dr. Emily Epley, a clinical psychologist based in Chicago, Illinois, and author of Autonomy Supportive Parenting.
Calling in from Vienna, Austria, I'm Michael Herold, ACT coach, confidence trainer, and the author of an upcoming book on developing your confidence and social skills.
From Boston, I'm Dr. Yael Schoenbrunn, faculty at Brown University and author of Work, Parent, Thrive and an upcoming book about misunderstanding.
And from coastal New England, I'm Dr. Jill Stoddard, author of Be Mighty, The Big Book of ACT Metaphors, and Imposter No More.
We hope you take what you learn here to build a rich and meaningful life.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. Nicholas Epley is the John Templeton Keller Distinguished Service Professor of Behavioral Science and Director of the Roman Family Center for Decision Research at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business. Try saying that 10 times really fast. Nick studies social cognition to understand why smart people so routinely misunderstand each other. He teaches an ethics and happiness course to MBA students called Designing a Good Life. His research has appeared in more than 24 empirical journals, and it has been featured by the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, CNN, Wired, and National Public Radio, among many, many others, and has been funded by the National Science Foundation and the Templeton Foundation. Nick is the author of Mindwise, How We Understand What Others Think, Believe, Feel, and Want, and I talked with him about that fantastic book last year on the show here. His new book is titled A Little More Social, How Small Choices Create Unexpected Happiness, Health, and Connection. And it was published in May. Our UK listeners will find the book titled, Hello, The Unexpected Power of Choosing to Connect. Just a reminder to stay until after the interview for the post-interview discussion, where we're doing something different this time, and I invited a very special guest. Welcome back to the show, Nick.
Thank you, Michael. It's great to be back.
I'm glad to have you back for this fantastic book. But Nick, I have to start with a fundamental disagreement that you must be having with my grandma, who has a very different stance on talking to strangers. So you wrote a book about the topic and she didn't. So I'll interview you first. I'll wait until my grandma writes hers. Why should we be talking with strangers more?
Well, our data show over and over and over again that we underestimate how positively these social experiences will go, and that we are overly anxious, overly pessimistic about how reaching out and connecting to another person will turn out. Decades of research in psychology has made it crystal clear that being connected with other people is critical for our well-being and our happiness. I'm not sure if you'd say it is the strongest determinant of happiness, but I could certainly argue with you in favor of it for quite a long while, and I think probably win that argument based on the data. But it's also critical for our health and for our longevity. Being lonely or isolated, disconnected from other people is a risk factor for cardiovascular dysfunction, for poor immune system functioning, because it's a stressor. You get a spike in cortisol levels in your bloodstream, which just makes you less healthy. And it also reduces the amount of life you have to live if you're lonely or isolated chronically. But I think the big benefit is that these experiences tend to turn out better than we think, which means that we're choosing not to have experiences that might otherwise lift us up. And if we're going to enrich our lives and make them better, it's going to be finding the opportunities, the positive opportunities in our lives that we're not taking, and connecting with other people a little more often, I think, is a big one.
You make this beautiful comparison to like eating healthy and doing more sports where we kind of know we should be doing it, but then it's like, maybe like next week or like there's a little bit of an excuse here and there. I would love to dig into the scientific reasons you found for like why people don't speak with others as much as they should or could. But I'm also curious, what are the most common objections that you get from someone when you say, hey, why don't you have more conversations with people out there? Why aren't you a little bit more social? What would people first and foremost say?
So first, why is it that we tend to be overly pessimistic about how others will respond to them when we reach out to them? And to be clear, this doesn't mean that all of our social interactions go well. What it means is when people think about doing the kinds of things that psychologists show connect us with other people, reaching out, saying hello to a stranger, having a deeper conversation than you might otherwise have, reaching out and expressing your gratitude to somebody, asking for help when you need it, expressing support to someone who you know is in need, being honest in your relationships rather than being inauthentic and dishonest. All of these things are things that psychologists know we've demonstrated over and over again in our research tends to create stronger relationships and improve people's mood, and yet we're choosing not to do it. Often, or sometimes we can choose not to do it at least. And the reason we find, or at least one reason, surely not the only one, is that our choices are guided by our expectations, and our expectations are just too pessimistic. That is, we underestimate how much we'll enjoy talking with a stranger. We underestimate how much we'll enjoy having a deep conversation. We underestimate how positively someone will respond to expressing gratitude, and on and on and on. And where does this pessimism come from? This gap between our expectations and our actual experience come from? It comes from at least, I think, 3 different sources. There are probably more, but there are 3 that we have documented. One is that whenever you're reaching out to connect with somebody else, to engage with them, and to be clear, this isn't other people reaching out to you. This isn't people accosting you on the street. This is somebody sits down next to you on a bus. Do you say hello to them, right? You go get a coffee. Do you greet your barista? Do you have a more meaningful conversation? There are 2 minds at work here, right? There's mine, so I'm reaching out to connect with you, Michael. And then there's your mind about how you respond to me. And it turns out that we evaluate ourselves differently than other people evaluate us. We tend to think about our competency. We tend to evaluate ourselves in terms of our competency. How well are we going to be able to do this, right? How am I going to be able to find something I have in common with this person to make this conversation go well? How am I going to put my gratitude into words? How am I going to actually support somebody who's in need? What am I going to do? Other people, though, tend to evaluate us not in terms of our competency, but in terms of our warmth. And so when we reach out to connect with other people in positive ways, in ways that are warm and kind and friendly, have a conversation, taking an interest in a meaningful conversation, expressing gratitude, the kinds of things that create relationships, we're doing something that's inherently positive from their side. And if we're worried about our competency, while they're noticing our kindness and our warmth, we're going to underestimate on average how well we're going to be received by another person. So that's a big one. Like when you reach out to express gratitude to somebody, your words kind of don't matter in some ways. Yeah. It's the intent behind it. When you have a conversation with somebody, it's the reaching out in a kind way up front that really gets it off on the right foot.
A classic example I like to use is the checkout lane at the grocery store, or the bus stop, or the person just sitting next to you on a bench, or someone you see in a park. And this objection that, but I'm not good at small talk. Right. I don't know how to transition over. Yes. I always run out of things to say, Nick. Then it never, ever gets put to the test. Yes. And it is using the wrong benchmark, because someone you start talking to in the bus might most likely be delighted that they are now being entertained by another human being as opposed to their smartphone. And they're not grading you on your prose and your grammar and all of that stuff.
And you mentioned right there just the other 2 things that also impair us. One is that that make us overly pessimistic. One is that our interactions are reciprocal. So when I say hi to you, you tend to say hi back to me, right? And so an interaction isn't just totally dependent on me. I'm not, in a 2-person canoe paddling all by myself.
Yeah.
You're paddling along with me. You're responding to me. And people tend to underestimate the power of that reciprocity. And so they imagine anything could happen. I could turn to you and say hi, and You could do almost anything in response to me. And that just turns out not to be true. Mostly when you reach out to other people, tend to reach back to you in a similar way.
Yeah.
That makes conversations flow more easily. You're coming up with things to talk about. They're coming up with things to talk about, and you reciprocate back and forth. That's true of pretty much all social interaction. There's reciprocity. So when you reach out in a positive way, then tend to reach out in a positive way in return. And then the last thing is what you said, is that if these two things, right, so the different perspectives and failing to appreciate reciprocity and responsiveness, if those two things plant some seeds of doubt or anxiety in your mind, then you might not try, right? I might not reach out to you as often as I could. I might not have as many conversations as I could. I will avoid people a little more often, and avoidance is self-fulfilling, right? Because if I don't have a conversation with you, if I think it would be unpleasant to talk to you, then I might never try, and I might not find out how delightful you would be to talk to. I might not find out I'm wrong. Optimism gets calibrated, but pessimism doesn't. And I think we can get a long way in explaining why maybe your grandma is overly pessimistic about how well she'd be received if she reaches out to other people, or why any of us do, right? Any of us do. I think we can get a long way with those three mechanisms in explaining them.
When I do workshops where I have people start approaching, strangers on the street,
Yeah.
a job description my grandma still isn't fine with. But when they do that, the first response that the participants have is that they come back with a smile and they say like,
Yeah.
I can't believe
Yeah.
what. And
Yeah.
we might be doing even not just like talking to them. There might be tell them a joke that isn't even funny. The amount of times I've seen participants approach someone to tell them a joke, and then they were like hooked in, and the other, no, now let me tell you some jokes.
Oh, yeah.
And then they're like gone for 15 minutes because they're exposed to the, that comedians' jokes, or people that would, like, this is a little bit of more of an extreme thing where people would go and they would purposefully try to get rejected. And your book, you talk about Jaya Jang.
Yeah.
This book, Rejection Proof, also
Yeah.
very fascinating.
Yeah.
Little bit of Michael trivia. I did my public speaker training with Jaya back in the day. And
Is
it was
that
so
right?
interesting. Yeah, to see
right?
him like behind stage. But he does like crazy stuff where he's like almost trying to get rejected. And we did this in workshops as well, where people had the exercise to go out there and get rejected like 10 times. Ask people for respectful but weird things like, can I try on your pants? Can I eat your ice cream? Can I have your hat? And then they would come back like 3 minutes later. In one hand, they hold a coffee, and the other, they hold ice cream, and they have a new hat on their head. And they're like, Michael, this isn't working. Right? And it's that, this is the testing for those like wrong.
This isn't working.
This is testing for the stuff that doesn't, like, the things we never expect would actually work because we never ever try.
Because we underestimate other people's kindness, right?
Yeah.
How positively others will respond when we reach out to them in a positive way. And that's what Jaya told me over and over again when I talked to him when I was writing this book. Actually, it was interesting. So we analyzed, he went through this 100-day exercise, trying to get rejected 100 days in a row, which is, classic exposure therapy, which you do in your work as well. And we analyzed all of his videos. He had like 107 or 106 total. And it turns out his crazy requests were accepted more often than he was rejected. He actually didn't know that. He hadn't analyzed these the same way like a researcher would. And the other thing is that he was fearing a harsh response. But even when he was rejected, when we coded the videos, the rejections weren't even negative. They were very mild, right? People would laugh it off and say, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that. But they were kind, right? And Jaya's told me, and I'll never forget this because I hear this from lots of people who reach out to lots of people, is that he came to feel like he had a superpower. He lost his fear of rejection, he told me, not because he developed thick skin, but because he learned that other people actually are quite kind. They respond quite well when you reach out to them. And he thought that felt like a superpower to him, right? Because if you're holding yourself back by misplaced thoughts and beliefs, I mean, that's just a prison of your own making. That's kind of a tragedy. And when you free yourself from that by actually testing some of those beliefs that are holding you back. In my own personal life, and I see it in our data, over 30,000 people we've run through experiments by this point. 120 published experiments we tallied the other day. We see it over and over again. Once you've, see those false beliefs that are holding you back, it's totally liberating.
Hey, just a quick sidebar here. I've been training people to develop their confidence and leave their comfort zone for over a decade now. Over the last couple of months, I took everything that I know on the matter and I turned it into a video course. It's 8 hours of confidence building awesomeness. The psychological principles, the exercises, the stories, the reflections, the glitter, everything. It's as comprehensive as I could possibly make it, and I'm incredibly proud how it turned out. Think back to a situation where you wanted to maybe start a conversation or speak up or just be yourself, and something stopped you. Maybe the story you've been telling yourself for years about who you are and what you're able to do. This is the course about that moment and how to do it differently the next time. You can find it here, herald.coach/course, and in the show notes. That's all. Back to the show. Do you have data or maybe even just a hunch on how many outreaches it takes before that switch flips in us? How many exposures does it take?
Well, I will tell you one for a split second, and then many, the number I don't know. So let me tell you about this paper we just
you might have to take that apart a little bit for me.
Yes. So this is actually isn't in the book because this is brand new research that just came out.
We
were
it
interested
first.
in how long does it take for people to learn this stuff? And I don't know about asking for help per se, but we had people just have a conversation with a stranger, right? Just in the lab or, over Zoom. But these were random strangers we paired together to get to know each other a little bit. In some studies, they predicted how it would go beforehand. In other studies, they didn't. But in one condition, people were having a conversation with somebody at time one or not having a conversation, okay? Mm-hmm. Right after that conversation or not, we told them in 2 weeks, we're going to have you come back and we're going to have you have a conversation with a stranger, okay? And they predicted how that conversation would go. The people who just had a conversation, they predicted that the conversation would go significantly better than those who didn't have a conversation. In fact, they predicted it would go about as well as the conversation they just had. So they learned something. In fact, they learned almost completely. They were not, for readers who are in the weeds on this, they were not rational Bayesian updaters in the sense that they added one interaction to their lifetime of experiences and nudged it up a little. They updated completely. But when we then brought them back 2 weeks later, they were right back where they started.
2 weeks is too long. Yeah.
Or even a week. We even had a week, right? I don't know what the delay period is, but when they were having a conversation with another person, they were also less optimistic about that. So they didn't generalize to talking in general. So we refer to this as fleeting generalization. Mm-hmm. So they learned quickly, but it's got to be something surely that they're getting a lot of data points on. I mean, one way to think about this maybe is like an experiment, right? That in our research, if we have one person do something and we see a result, we don't learn anything from that, really. It's just one data point in an experiment. We learn from 100 or 200 or 500 people doing the same thing over and over again. And maybe people are like that they just need a lot more data as they ought to update permanently, but we don't know what that is. Trying once will not do it.
No, trying once will not do it.
Right.
And so my rule of thumb, if it's tacked pretty closely, like I try to give people hope by saying like, do this 20 times and you're probably, that's just my gut feeling, like depending on how complex the task is as well, how much skill it requires. But if it's simply about, I am scared of this versus no, I'm fine, I can do this all day long. My number is 20 if it happens fairly quickly. Like if you have 2 weeks apart each time of those 20, nothing is going to happen. If you do them too quickly, the same thing. When I give homework to my clients and they have to leave their comfort zone a couple of times before we meet again or before they move to the next lesson, I tell them like, you're not allowed to do your homework all in one day. Like you need to do that. You need to space this out because the first time I sent you out to give a compliment to a stranger, you will be so full of joy and adrenaline, then the next two won't even be difficult. I kind of want them to be a little, like I want them to leave their comfort zone because it's hard, right? So give it 24 hours and then the next day, the same reluctance comes up again.
You want them to return back to their baseline again right away.
Yes.
Right? That updating.
I don't want them to run the high, to like surf on the high. Once they're good at this, like surf on the high, like all you want, like go and use the momentum. But since it's my job to teach people to leave their comfort zone on purpose, like we need to build like this little bit of a barrier that actually makes it difficult.
Michael, you got to collect data around this, my friend. I would love to see this. You could find out what these numbers actually look like. So Gillian Sandstrom, who's a psychologist in the UK, fabulous researcher, also studies talking with strangers and our reluctance to do that, ran an experiment that I love, a social scavenger hunt experiment with Erica Boothby and Gus Cooney, where they had people reach out and have conversations essentially with strangers for 5 days in a row. They found very rapid updating for the likelihood of being rejected over 5 days. So this wasn't 20 times, although they might have had, because they had people doing multiple things a day, but it's in the ballpark of what you're having people do. They got much more calibrated about the likelihood of being rejected. They got more optimistic. They thought people would reject them less, but they still underestimated how much they would enjoy the conversation to an equal degree over the course of the week, right? But we're not running the kinds of experiments that you are in your practice day after day after day. And I would love to talk after this about research that maybe you could do. I would love to see what this actually looks like over time. You could find out.
Yeah. Okay. Let's do this.
You may have noticed that it's allergy season already, and pretty soon it will be wildfire season. I'm taking care of myself and my family with my new Air Doctor air purifier. It's giving me peace of mind and extra protection from allergens and wildfire smoke. Air Doctor's powerful 3-stage filtration captures extremely small particles, about 100 times smaller than what typical air purifiers can remove. It captures airborne contaminants you definitely don't want to be breathing in: dust, pollen, mold spores, pet dander, wildfire smoke, bacteria, viruses, odors, smoke, ozone, and volatile organic compounds. It's whisper quiet while it's running, not loud like other air filters on the market, and its auto mode feature ensures optimal air 24/7. You'll get reminders to change your filter so you don't need to remember or guess when to do it. Air Doctor won Newsweek's Reader's Choice Award for Best Air Purifier. Head to airdoctorpro.com and use promo code POTC to get up to $300 off today. Air Doctor comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee plus a 3-year warranty, an $84 value free. Get this exclusive podcast-only offer now at airdoctorpro.com, airdoctorpro.com, using promo code POTC. Hey therapists, this is for you. I want you to know about Simple Practice, an all-in-one EHR that is HIPAA compliant, high-trust certified, and built specifically for therapists. I've been in private practice for about 7 years, and I've used Simple Practice since I first started. Simple Practice helps me streamline everything. I just send each new client a link, and they log on to my portal to access my consent form, billing, invoices, and set up appointment reminders. I even use Simple Practice as my HIPAA-compliant telehealth video platform. It frees up admin time so I can focus on the important stuff, seeing my clients. And I'm not the only POTC co-host who uses it. Emily does too, and Jill uses it to manage her group practice. If you're just starting out or growing your practice, there's also a credentialing service that takes the headache out of insurance enrollment, which will save you a lot of time and effort. Simple Practice is trusted by over 250,000 health and wellness professionals, and you can feel that in how thoughtfully it's built for our work. If you're ready to simplify the business side of your practice, now is the perfect time to try Simple Practice. Start with a 7-day free trial and then get 50% off your first 3 months. Just go to simplepractice.com to claim the offer. Again, that's simplepractice.com.
So people might think that the takeaway from the book is just talk to people like left, right, and center, talk to them all the time, which isn't feasible. But you're making this really good point of saying like, look, like if you're on the fence right now, if you're just like, you kind of, but you're not sure, like use those moments to expand your repertoire a little bit and use those like, look, I'm not sure if low-hanging fruit is the right word for it.
Easy choices, right?
Easy choices.
Right?
It's like, hey, I'm questioning whether I should be doing that right now anyway. I might as well just go out and say something and do something. And you talk about this interesting principle there where if it's something is far in the future, we seem to think that I'm going to totally do that. But if it's like in the next 10 seconds, the idea is like, no, you know what? Like, I'm not I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to hear you expand on that a little bit and add what happens after. So what I see, to bring this back to my own like little shenanigans, people will be super reluctant to do a challenge. Like, for example, I have them start out to lie down in a public place, and they might be lying down in a mall or in a sidewalk, which is hilarious. It's become a little bit of a movement in Vienna, actually. So they lie down on the sidewalk, right? And they will tell me that they were walking around for like an hour just procrastinating on struggling, which is brilliant because they see how their mind works.
The thing. Yeah.
And then the moment their bum hits the ground, they're like, you know what? Like, this was all over. The moment my bum hit the ground, like, my anxiety is like, this is happening. So I'm curious if this maps to what you see in conversations as well, that people might be very reluctant to open their mouth, but then the moment the first hellos are exchanged, the reluctance changes.
So we have not tracked this in the way we ought to. I would like to. That experience of going from anxiety the moment before until you open your mouth and then it getting much easier. Certainly, so many anecdotes show up like the one you describe, right? So public speaking is often this way, that you are very anxious about it beforehand. And then when you get up there and actually start doing the thing, it's much easier than you would imagine it to be.
Except that public speaking is different in regards that you can't bail out. Right? Because it's not like after the first hello, you doubt whether you should be running
Whereas
away.
in a conversation, you can bail out.
Yeah, exactly. Like, try that being a public speaker, and it's probably not going to go too well.
Michael, you're on the cutting edge here. You keep leading me to the research I'm doing today while we're talking. So right now we're running experiments where we allow people to start conversations. They tell us how long they want to talk over a period of 20 minutes. This is with my fabulous former postdoc Stavatiers at the University of Wisconsin and my PhD student Nick DiMaggio. Both are terrific. They say how long they think they want to have a conversation for, right? And then we let them start the conversation and look at how long they actually stay in it. And what we're finding so far quickly, at least in the early results, is that people, when they can choose to end the conversation subtly, right, by just signaling to the experiment that they want to quit, whenever they want, they talk a lot longer than they think they would want to. Because once they're in it, it goes much better than they think. So they stay in it longer than they would bet. But this avoidance, this change in avoidance motivation, this anxiety that happens right before the moment you're going to do something that leads us to chicken out of something right at the last minute, that is a phenomena. Every clinician knows this well, has been trained in this for decades. This goes back to research in the 1920s and 30s on a gradient of approach and avoidance motivation. We've known for decades and decades that as you're leading up to a choice, right, at a distance, all the reasons to do this, right, the reasons why you might want to have this conversation or have a deep conversation or express your gratitude to somebody, all of those approach motivations are very powerful at a distance. Right? A week from now, 2 weeks from now, it's all abstract. This is no problem.
Yeah.
Fear and anxiety, all that hot stuff, right? The stuff that the avoidance motivation that would keep you from doing something, that's all heat of the moment stuff. So when you get right up to it, people's confidence tends to plummet, for instance. So people who are about to take a test think they're going to do worse on that test than they did a week before when they're predicting how they're going to do on that test. And that's true in conversation, I think, too. People might think that they'd like to talk with people more, have conversations more, but when they get right up to it, boom, their confidence drops. But as soon as you start the conversation, or at least in these approach avoidance experiments, as soon as they start the thing, the avoidance motivation tends to drop very quickly once they're doing it. And I would expect that to be very true in conversation as well. But that avoidance motivation is what keeps people from choosing to do the things that even at a distance they would think they would want to do. And it's based to some extent on mistaken fears about how other people will respond. And you can, as we talked before, successfully whittle away at that if you actually get the data you'd need over and over again to calibrate your beliefs.
Yeah. I wanted to almost give our listeners a little bit of a homework assignment. And you have this beautiful example about you live in Chicago, so there's a bunch of tourists, as are in Vienna, and tourists take photos of themselves. And they seem to be doing that either with a long arm, using it, or Or they're still around, selfie sticks.
Yeah.
Right? And then you have this beautiful example of just asking people to take a photo of you, right? So I feel like I want to almost give that as a homework assignment to listeners to be like, you know what? Like go somewhere, even if it's in your neighborhood, and ask someone to take a photo of you. It's such a low bar. And it's like it's a mix between asking for help, which is very much accepted as a reason to start a conversation, right? It's not weird at all to start a conversation with someone. People will think if there's a need to ask for help, much more acceptable, or in the minds of many people, it's more acceptable to start a conversation by asking for help.
Yeah.
What's the time? Where's the main street? Whatever. Then, hi, my name's Michael. I want to talk to you for half an hour.
Yeah. So let me explain the research that we did. This was part of research that was following up on a well-known phenomena in the field, which is that people tend to underestimate how likely others are to agree to help when you ask them, right? So Jaya learned this by asking people for help over and over again. It describes that in his book, Rejection Proof. And other researchers had documented this as well. People think, though, they would need to ask, say, 10 people in order to find 3 who would be willing to take a picture of them, right? But when they actually go out and do it, they need to ask far fewer. People are much more willing to agree to help them than they would guess. And one reason for this might be that people underestimate just how compliant other people will be. What we find in our work is that people underestimate just how willing other people will be to help. It's a positive thing. In fact, psychologists for decades now have documented that we are made happier when we are being kind to other people, when they're helping them in some way. It makes us feel competent, makes us feel capable, it connects us with another person. Doing acts of kindness lift us up. And we found that asking for help, which enables another person to do an act of kindness for you, leaves the helper feeling better than the requesters expect. Yeah. So we ask people in a touristy sort of area, well, at a botanical garden here in Chicago, and we've done this a few different places, but that's one place we did, to go out and ask somebody to take a picture of them on this instant camera that spits out an actual picture of them. Before they went out and asked somebody for help, they predicted how willing the person would be to do it, how happy they would feel to do it, how much of a burden it would seem to do this, right? And then they went out and they actually asked the person for help. Almost everybody, 90+%, were agreed to right away, and the other, 3 people got an acceptance on their second effort, on their second request. We then stopped the people who had actually helped and asked them, how did that actually make you feel, right? And what we found was that the requesters, the people who were reaching out, underestimated how willing, how happy the person would feel to help, and overestimated how burdened they would feel. It was an uplifting moment to have been asked to help there when people thought it would be a burden. And I think that's just another example of the pessimism that we have when we think about reaching out to connect with other people. Other people are more willing to help you than you'd bet. I think the selfie stick is a great totem to interpersonal understanding, right? It is a device that was created to prey on our insecurities and our misunderstanding, our lack of optimism about how nice other people are.
I'll give you the polar opposite to the selfie stick. I sometimes still do ask tourists to take a photo of me. And then they ask for my camera and I say, no, use your camera. I want you to have a photo of me. And the amount of laughter that gets, and I don't know how many photo rolls of tourists I kid you not, a few years ago, someone out of the blue emailed me a high resolution, super great photo of me. And he said, Michael, do you remember me? We met a year ago in front of the cathedral and you asked me to take a photo of you. Here it is. We had been chatting for another half hour after that and exchanged cards. I like to approach things with curiosity and humor. It makes things easier for me. And sometimes these approaching strangers is for me easier when I infuse it with that humor, which is a core value of mine. Yeah. So that sometimes I'm actually might be asking or starting a conversation with something that is on purpose a little bit weirder because it makes it easier for me and it puts a smile on the other person, and it like immediately drops us into a deeper conversation because we connected on a similar level of energy, I want to say.
You're in synchrony.
Synchrony, that was the
right?
word. That was
You're
the
synchronized, yeah. Can I put another frame on that I think might be helpful to listeners, at least it connects with something we talked about earlier. Often when people will ask me, like after they hear about our work, they'll ask, well, okay, how do I actually now do this? What do I do to start a conversation? Thinking that they're like magical words, right? And there are some good words that you can use, right? But notice that feels very much like a focus on our competency.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I've got to have,
yeah.
right? Yeah, I got to have some set of tricks or something. And that can certainly raise our confidence because we are so focused on our competency. But what you just described there is what I think is actually a much more effective thing, which is changing your mindset about an interaction. I think conversations go much better. We have not tested this as precisely as I want to. I got to get Nick and Stav and my other collaborators interested in doing this with me. But I think approaching people with, as you said, curiosity, or I often think about it as taking an interest in other people.
Yeah.
Bill Nye, famous science guy, once said, everyone you ever meet knows something you don't. Right? And that's absolutely true. They've been to places you haven't been, seen things you've never seen, done things you've never done, know things you never knew, right? And if you approach people with that kind of curiosity or interest, to let them tell you their story, then you can be adaptive to the situation you are in, and it just makes you much easier to start that conversation and make it proceed if you walk into it with the right kind of mindset.
Hey listeners, I have a brand new office in Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and I made myself a pretty valuable addition because I brought my AquaTrue countertop water purifier to share with my suite mates. So no more contaminated tap water or microplastics from bottled water for a whole bunch of New Hampshire mental health providers. Now they too get to join 98% of customers who say their drinking water is cleaner, safer, and healthier. Really, it's no wonder AquaTrue has been featured in Business Insider, Popular Science, and Good Housekeeping. Head to aquatrue.com now and get 20% off your purifier using promo code POTC. AquaTrue even comes with a 30-day best-tasting water guarantee or your money back. Take the guesswork out of pure, great-tasting water with this exclusive podcast-only offer now at aquatrue.com. That's AQUATRU.com using promo code POTC. And remember, when you support our sponsors, you're supporting the podcast.
How do you find that curiosity about the other person as you approach them? They're a blank sheet. Like you don't know what's going to come your way. I had one workshop participant with the task to talk to strangers. A huge Iron Maiden fan approached strangers, run into the lead drummer of Iron Maiden as she was starting a conversation with a stranger. Now, those had immediately something to talk about, right? The curiosity was immediately lit, and this lady was like totally, wow. But usually we talk to someone and we don't know what's going to come our way. So how does someone who talks to a stranger probe, like ask them? Because curiosity comes from us. Of course, the other person might, as in the case of Iron Maiden drummers, like offer that item of commonality, but sometimes we have to search for it. We have to fish for it. What's the approach there?
Notice, by the way, we do this every time we start a movie or we open a book to watch it. We don't know what's coming. Conversation is similar, except we have different priors beforehand. One thing that I like to do when you just take an interest in somebody, they've got a story to tell you, right? They have something interesting that you don't even know about. I just ask them that directly. One of the things I love to start with, if I have time to talk with somebody, is to ask them, can you tell me your story?
Ooh, okay.
How'd you get here today? Right? And I kind of understand when I start that way that they're wanting me to tell them about their history, about their life experience. And this is a great thing to do with people who are, quite different from you, because they have things that you never kind of imagined or knew of, but it works with everybody. And, I was talking with David Brooks quite a while ago about this, some years ago. He's a New York Times columnist. He just retired from that recently. And he was very nervous about engaging with people. He started doing this, and he in a talk one time and in a conversation with me too, he said, what's the percentage of times I've asked somebody to tell me about themselves or to tell me their story, and they've said, it's none of your damn business. And the answer is none. Never.
Yeah.
Like nobody ever says that. Nobody ever responds to you that way, right? And you just will be shocked by what you hear. The stories that I've heard from cab drivers or on planes. I was on a plane flight one time with a couple where they met after the Vietnam War. She was Chinese. He was a soldier in the U.S. military. He went back to ask her to marry him after the war. She was on the Chinese side of the Vietnam border. She teaches English as a second language in the suburbs of DC to folks, in disadvantaged communities. He ended up working for the Department of Energy and was one of the 9 people, he said at the time, who had ever been inside the North Korean nuclear facilities. What?
Yeah. That beats onboard entertainment.
Yes, for sure it does, right? The number of conversations that I've had like this where people tell you something that's amazing is large. And the way I like to do this to get beyond small talk really fast is to take an interest in somebody and just have them tell you their interesting story.
Yeah.
They can do it if you ask them.
Well, our listeners have the homework assignment to have photos taken of them, and then they can follow that up with a conversation and asking about the other person's story.
Yes.
How about that?
Yes, that sounds great.
Nick, thank you so much for your time and the amazing work that you are doing and have been doing. I told you before we started recording that for me, this book is hope. This is pure hope of people connecting and sharing. And I think if people talk with each other, this world would be quite a different place. And this book tells people how to talk with each other.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you for writing that. Where do you want to send people that want to hear more about you, want to read your book, want to participate in your experiments, want to have a Polaroid photo taken of them in Chicago?
Yeah.
Where do you want to send people?
So anywhere you buy books or get your audiobooks, you'll be able to find A Little More Social and also Mindwise, my first book. My hope really is that the book provides a platform like we're doing right now for people to hear about it when they wouldn't otherwise. Whether they buy the book or not, you get a lot more depth and detail into the research and a lot more suggestions for how to proceed from that. But even just the conversation like this, I think can be, I hope, hugely impactful for people. I also am now starting to do LinkedIn a little bit. I don't do social media because it makes me miserable. But that's something I found to be kind of fun. So you'll find me on LinkedIn too. Otherwise, if you go to the Roman Family Center for Decision Research, you'll see a talk series at the University of Chicago that we can do that people can sign up to participate in, to view online. And those are probably the best ways to connect with me.
Nick, remind me, your book has a cute cover in the UK version, and it has a different title, doesn't it?
It does. Hello, the Unexpected Power of Choosing to Connect in the UK.
So that's for our UK listeners.
Which I love, and it's got a little hedgehog down in the lower right-hand corner of the book. My wife loves that one very much. We now have little hedgehogs all around the house. Not live ones, but sculptures and figurines and things for it. Yes. Hello, the Unexpected Power of Choosing to Connect in the UK.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Nick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Michael.
For today's co-host discussion, we're doing something that we've never done before. I am not recording this with a co-host of the podcast, but with a listener. I'm joined here today by psychologist, therapist, and person extraordinaire, Dr. Jennifer Kauder. Jen has her practice in Iowa, where she lives with her husband and cat. There are so many reasons that I love that we're able to do this. Nick's book is about reaching out to people. And that's how my friendship with Jen started, because reaching out and getting in touch, that's what Jen did a few years ago after listening to an episode. We got to chat and we connected. And for a long time now, I've considered Jen to be a really close friend of mine. If we don't hear from each other for more than 2 days, that's a very rare event. And it all started with a simple hello. Oh, and then also, and this is something neither of us knew until I spoke with Nick, she apparently lives in his former hometown, just a few blocks away from where Nick grew up. Awesome as it seems, clusters. Hi, Chen. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Michael. It's great to be here.
So first time we're having a listener do this. So you know how this works, Chen. What were your thoughts on the interview with Nick?
I thought it was fun to hear you two talk to each other because so much laughter and connection there. And it really just resonated so much with the things I see with my clients and in my life too.
So something that stood out to me that I didn't talk about with Nick, and that's very relevant, I think, to how the both of us got to become friends, is he writes in his book about importance of voice. Because if we use text only or email or whatever, then yes, there are certain clues that get missed, like sarcasm and so on, as we all know, doesn't really work in email or text or so on. But there's something more important to it. And that is when we hear the voice of the person that we're communicating with, we get a sense that there's a human being on the other end. And because both you and I don't think I share too much if I say that, we're copious talkers. Like we can talk a lot. And so we pretty quickly switched over to using voice messages on WhatsApp to communicate because I hate typing with my thumbs. And if I had to type with my thumbs, my communication reduces to the bare minimum. And that's kind of the point that I want to make. And I'm curious on your opinion on this as well. Or maybe this is different in Iowa, but I see a lot of people like on the sidewalk, in the subway, in the bus, texting on the phone. Now, that in and of itself, as we know through Nick's work, like why not just talk to the person sitting next to you? But also, to add insult to injury, texting with someone makes you lose that little bit of that human connection that a voice message does or a phone call does. And I have learned that at best, text is for, hey, I'm going to be 5 minutes late, or do you have time on Friday, right? But not this extended, like if someone texts me, how are you? Like that is a no, like I'm not, like, no, I'm not. This is like, we're having this conversation over the phone. I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
In Iowa, I would think in a lot of spaces, we are on our phones, we're looking down, sitting in a waiting room or riding on the bus. There's so much information to be gained that way, but also it does get in the way of those human connections. And I think that it makes it scarier sometimes. It's a scary thing to reach out to somebody and not know how they're going to respond. And Nick had talked about that too, like how we anticipate things aren't going to go as well as they are. And I think stepping outside of that comfort zone to just have the conversation, I think once you do it, the greater likelihood you're going to have better experiences.
So I have to say that ever since my conversation with Nick, I've been like doing it a lot more because I'm doing it for different reasons now almost. It feels like I used to do it as an exercise, something that I wanted to train. I wanted to get better at just talking to people, small talk, big talk, more meaningful talk, and to just get better at this and then engage with people. And now I'm doing it simply because I know that talking to them is going to make them feel better and it's going to make me feel better. And the reason that I'm talking to the lady sitting next to me on the train is not to just get a lot better at having conversations with people. It is simply to put a smile on that person's face and on mine. And I realize the only time I get rejected, because now I've had my eye on this, the only times I got rejected by someone shaking their head and walking off, it was because they didn't speak my language.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that makes me think about too is when you were getting your confidence course ready to put out there, I was one of like the people that got to participate in the live group to help, give you feedback and test it out. And on the one hand, like a lot of my clients struggle with anxiety. And I think it's just in general, it is just hard as adults, especially to like meet people and make friends. And so I work with people on this, and at the same time, like going through some of those challenges, because that's what you had us do. Some of them sounded pretty easy. Like, you're going to go out and you're going to do a thing that's like not the scariest thing ever. Like you're not going to go
robbing a bank.
Yeah.
Robbing a bank. I stopped giving that assignment because I kept losing clients. So that used to be the 10.
They can't join from jail probably. Yeah. So,
no.
But they're like these little things where like the consequences they're not that hard, but at the same time, like doing them, it's like I would notice my mind just predicting like terrible things that were going to happen. Like one of them was dancing in public, but public could be however we defined it. And I recorded that for the group. I had nightmares, which I didn't think that would be like, but it was funny. Like I could laugh about it and everything was fine.
So I think that's the fundamental difference between the work that Nick does and that I do, where for Nick makes it very clear in his book, and we talk about this in the interview as well, that it's about those moments where it's so obvious and so easy that Nick says, well, just go and do it. Like he calls it the choice.
Mm-hmm.
You just go and talk to people. And I am on the other end of that spectrum where I purposefully will have someone do something when they don't feel like doing it. And that came across in our conversation as well, how we both realized how much overlap there was in whether it's a big step outside of your comfort zone or just a friendly hello to the other person.
Yeah. Yeah. And back to your point about the voice, there's so much room for miscommunication or misinterpretation with the air quotes safer thing of texting and then predicting. That's how everybody thinks. Like that's what's going on in their mind, and they're really judgmental. But I think you and Nick had talked about this, about how when people from a distance can be scary, but like when you're interacting and in real time, there is just so much more you can get from hearing somebody's voice and hearing laughter and, sharing stories. Like it brings a depth, I think, to the interaction that sometimes is missing in written text.
Yeah. So people pick up the phone, call people, leave voice messages, and text only if necessary, and look where you're going as you're walking down the sidewalk. Chen, thank you so much for doing this with me. This was one of the highlights of my podcasting year so far. So you've put the bar quite high. Thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it. And I appreciate you.
Thank you for listening to Psychologists Off the Clock. You can now listen to our podcast ad-free by becoming a supporter on Patreon. You can link to Patreon on our website or go to patreon.com/offtheclocksite.
If you enjoy our podcast, you can help us out by leaving a review and sharing this episode with a friend or an enemy who would enjoy it.
You can get more psychology tips by subscribing to our fabulous newsletter on Substack. Or if you're still addicted to social media, find us on Instagram and LinkedIn.
We'd like to thank our rockstar production manager, Jadine Stout-Williams.
Now for the boring part. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and is not meant to be a substitute for mental health treatment. If you're looking for mental health treatment, please visit the resources page of our website, offtheclockpsych.com.